Okay, hi everyone. Firstly, thank you for this opportunity. And as per usual, I have 101 different thoughts racing in my head and trying to make sense of all of them in the next, what? How many minutes do I have? 10? Oh, that's a long time. Okay. But in 20 minutes is a big ask at the moment. So I've got to give you a bit of history in terms of where I come from, because I think in order for you to understand what I'm going to do in the next, let's say, 18 minutes now, you need to have some kind of understanding of myself as a person. So if you've been paying attention to the accent, you will know that I'm South African. Why do I say that? Because every time I try to tell people that I come from South Africa, here in Oxford, they say, we can hear that, so relax. So seems like an oddity to say it, but I'm South African. I'm originally from Cape Town, so we see the mother city, you think about the ocean, but there's also huge amounts of poverty. And the divide in terms of racial segregation 25 years later actually continues, okay? And we see that in terms of spatial geometries, we see that in terms of how people relate to each other on a day-to-day basis, etc. So in that kind of frame, if you position me in 1993 in a classroom at UCT, anthropology, didn't know what it was about, and when the dean asked me, what would you like to study, you need a fourth subject. It can't just be sociology and the intensive and psych. I said, I don't know what that is, but it's early in the morning and I'd like to leave like lunchtime, because I was a day student, right? So I ended up doing anthropology as an ARB subject. And so sit in the first lecture at about 8:10 in the morning, right at the back, there are about 350, 360 students. 1993, we're on the eve of supposedly a democratic South Africa. And here's a white man, tall, lanky, jeans, sweater, doesn't really look like it might have been washed. Felt schooner, anyone from South Africa, you'll know what that is. Stands in front there, ponytail, and says, race is a social construct. Now, I've always said to people, I'm apolitical. When the school decided to do the normal, let's have an issue with the principal, Joy went, you guys can do that. I will observe. So it makes sense, right? I become an anthropologist, I observe. Yeah. So when this man tells me this white man, I go, And instead of taking a step back, I lean in, right? And I often say to people, this is when my relationship with anthropology started. I'm constantly wanting to divorce it. It doesn't want to divorce me. So we have a back and forth on the regular. And it started on that day. Why? Because all of a sudden, a white person was saying to me that how you have been constructed is not in your physical being. It's not biological. How you are perceived has been constructed by people in power or people who need to be in power, okay? And in order to do that, we need to create divisions. We need to create classes of human beings. And if it's not in relation to race, it's in relation to gender, it's in relation to class, it's in relation to sexuality, and more recent for me, in relation to whether you have a child or not. Okay? So what I'm wanting to tell you in the next 10 minutes, keep cutting, is that research for me has been about my life cycle and my introduction to a discipline which many people have actually said was used in South Africa as a means to create segregation, and it was, okay? And in the past year and a bit, I find myself in an institution where that actually happened, where anthropologists at the UFS confirmed racial segregation, confirmed that it was important to keep people separate, okay? And how did they do that? With the word culture. And so here's where I start to have a little bit of trouble with some of my African counterparts. I don't like the word culture, okay? Because of my particular history. It was used as a means to batter people, as a means to tell people you are not allowed in this institution. So in 1993, when I entered UCT, I didn't think it was weird because my mother had aspirations, right? A means of social mobility was to get an education. So what do? You go to UCT, not because it's UCT or Moscow on the hill. It's because it's close enough that you are safe as a girl. You're not married. You don't have a baby, so you're my girl, right? You're my baby. So you have to be safe. Enter UCT, get this education, still feeling like I belong, but I don't know how I belong, right? Then I find myself doing research, PhD research on Congolese migrants in Cape Town. And my white mentor, head of department, Professor Palmer, writes a paper in which he says, Joy is unique because she's actually focusing on the other. It might still be in her backyard, but it's the other. And she's unusual because other South African black, whether male or female or colored, whatever it is, do not do this. They study their own, okay? Then I go, but why would this be strange for me as a person of this color to study the other? That's what I've been told through what I've been reading and the classes I've been attending, that in order to be a good anthropologist, you have to study the other. Am I not doing good anthropology? And isn't it even better because that happens to be the African other, not the white other, right? Because surely this creates some kind of capital in the academy. But I don't think about this until I start to teach, because it's normal. I mean, come on, we anthropologists study the other. Even if it's the person standing right here, you're still the other. You're in a separate body, right? Philosophy might argue differently. Spirituality probably as well. But when you go, I can see you, yeah, you are the other. Yeah? So in my thinking, I start to understand that every time I other someone else, I lose a bit of me. And so when I find myself in a teaching space, I keep pushing my students, whether they self-identify as white, black, colored, Indian, human, rainbow nation, doesn't matter. I keep pushing them to understand that when you actually study the other, you are studying yourself. Because the potential exists, right, within the human species for huge diversity. So every time you enter an interaction, an engagement, when you engage in the other, you are engaging yourself, right? So when a white professor says to a black student, an honors black student, no, go and study your ethnic group, because there you won't have a language problem, and you have a very short time to do the honors paper, right? And then the white student is encouraged to also go and look at a black population, and the language issue isn't a problem. I raise a question, but how does this function? Because through my supervision of black students who have been working on their own, I realize it takes longer to do the field work. It takes longer to do the write-up. Because in the process, what happens? They actually realize that even if I thought I was studying my own, I'm actually studying the other. And that creates this cognitive dissonance. I hope that's the correct term, Dixon. But it creates this cognitive dissonance, right? A crisis that we are ill-equipped to actually deal with because we're pushing you through the program. So I start to feel, okay, What happens when you question yourself in relation to the life of your fieldwork? You start to see how you are received by people. And in the frame of the PhD, I realized that these others are my brothers. They protect me. They've allowed me to engage with them because they're also getting something from me. I'm not the all-powerful, omniscient anthropologist. They are figuring out how to use English. I have a vehicle, they don't. We can go many places, right? And after a while, I realized, but I'm becoming a part of their lives as they are becoming a part of mine. There's no distinction between fieldwork and life. Yeah? Not many anthropologists want to hear that because we still try to be pseudoscientific. We still try to say the object of attention. There's a problem. It's the subject of attention. And that subject of attention is looking at you as a subject and is identifying you as a particular person, right? So what happens? 2018, there's a new person, postdoc in the department. He's been there for a year. He comes along, he says, "You're the person who studies transnational migration. We're going to look at transnational migrants in Bloemfontein." Now, of course, this sounds, whoa, right? Because everybody's been doing work in Cape Town, Johannesburg, Durban, not really looking at the smaller cities in South Africa. So I go, this is awesome. This is an opportunity to write again and to engage. And because I've just had a son who was 5.5 months at that point, I go, easy field work in my backyard, right? Because then I'm presented with a potential gatekeeper who says, I can even find you the person you can speak to. Huh? Well, how? My training was you build rapport with people, you build resonance, you get to know them, you engage, you live, you eat, you worship, you take long journeys, you walk by the ocean, you get to know them before you decide to say, can I have an official interview and record you? Okay? So from the beginning, I have an issue, but I don't say it because I've just recently arrived at the UFS. I don't quite know what the dynamics are, what the politics are. Okay? It takes me an entire year before I get to a point and I say, I'm not going to do this paper. An entire year. I have one moment with this woman who he brings to my office. She gets to see a bit of me. And now there's a power imbalance in some ways. I start to feel uncomfortable because when do your informants enter your office? When do they get to see how you behave, how you are received, how you engage in your world? And as we try to have this engagement, the more I try to probe, I feel, but I'm not getting anything from this woman because there are lots of silences. And towards the end of the process, I actually realized, but she's been promised something that I don't even know about. She holds onto this paper and she keeps saying, I don't have my papers. I need to secure my family, my husband, my 2 sons. And I'm going, yo, no, this is all wrong. This is all wrong, right? So I completely forget what I know about Congolese people and the need to build social networks. Not what you know, it's who you know, right? And across class, race, nationality, etc. I forget, I throw that out the window because I'm now having an existential crisis in terms of a researcher because I'm feeling disempowered. Okay? We have a number of engagements thereafter, but it still feels wrong. And so when I'm asked by the editor to produce the paper, I say I can't. I cannot write about a full human being, not Congolese, full human being, human becoming, maybe as Ingold will say, based on one interview and 2 or 3 minor engagements. I can't. I hear my dean saying to me, you've just lost a research paper. I hear me say to me, no, you haven't, because you can still write this up in terms of power dynamics. Right? Bring me to Oxford. So why am I doing this? Bring me to Oxford. So I've had resonances with the people I've been working with and who have been working with me. Even with Francoise, where I go, I'm not going to write this paper, right? I come to Oxford, and Joy being Joy wants to make connections. And I don't care who I make connections with. It's a smile. It's a connection. It's an acknowledgement on the bus. It's a connection. It's the bus driver saying to me when I say, good morning, oh, have you forgotten? It's the afternoon. Oh, sorry. Why is he talking to me? Bus drivers don't do this. Right? It's my son at nursery school, because now I have a son, which I didn't have before. That changes the dynamic completely. And the daycare mother says to me, Jordan has this tendency of putting his hand in the other children's food. And I kind of go, yeah, because he's under 2. And then she goes, but you know, that's not appropriate because they have the individual plates. And I go, but what is the actual problem? Because on the African continent, we sometimes eat out of the same bowl, the same pot, the same plate. We are accustomed to our children's hands in our food, and you still eat it. Even if it's been, you go, the best thing, right? So I start to feel, again, a bit of the dissonance through my son. Then a very normal question, I guess, for some people was someone saying to me, how do you get Jordan's hair to be like that? Because he's got curly hair, and they're tight curls, right? So you do this in the morning, and he looks a bit like a brown Einstein. I always see him like that. It's brown Einstein. And then by the end of the day, it's kind of gone. But they're wanting to know, what do you do with his hair? And so I notice this moment where the hand goes onto his hair. And I go, ooh, you're not supposed to do that. But in the moment I go, as an anthropologist, Joy, what is just happening? Somebody's engaging with another. And where children just do it on the regular, they don't articulate reasons, they just explore. The adult is articulating the need to understand the other. So in that moment, rather than being a brown mother, I choose to be a human being who understands that some other human being is trying to understand my son and my connection with him. Right? Now this is weird. Short life cycle given to you. What are the lessons? I do a lot what Dixon does. I always try to find, what is the lesson here? Okay? I have for a very long time tried to ignore what this body means to the external. Whenever I have taught, it has been as a human being first and foremost. And in the process, I've been able to say, we need to create bridges of understanding. And that means I push everybody. Everybody. And I piss everybody off also. Right? So I become that catalyst because I need people to understand that who they are researching, inevitably working with, and inevitably could also fall in love with are human beings. And I feel the need to do that because that wasn't given to us in our teaching. Here's a text, go and read it. The savage, the noble savage, needing civilization, right? No understanding of various knowledges and the strength of that. And so now what do we start to do? We call it indigenous knowledge. It's not indigenous knowledge. It's not. It's human knowledge that has existed for centuries. People want to connect with each other all the time. But we create the opportunity to do so and also the disconnection. And when you're doing research, it is okay to connect and disconnect, actually, because that's you being human, right? So even as I try to ignore this body, I have now in recent times come to understand that speaking from this body becomes powerful for those who look like me. I never fully comprehended that when my black students would come into my office and say, I like that thing hanging there. Because I put the PhD up, right? That was 7 long years of toil and sweat and wanting to kill everybody in my path who kept saying, how's the PhD going? So I need to remind myself that I worked for that thing. It was for me, right? But the students were coming in saying, no, that's for us. And then I go, no, it's just Joy, stop it. And then they go, okay, can we say, Mama Dr. Joy? And I'd say, no. That still sounds weird, because the doctor's there. Then they went, but it's less formal than Dr. Owen, so can we say Dr. Joy? And then I went, but I'm not that columnist who writes on sexual problems. So can we just not, right? Why? Because I felt uncomfortable. I felt uncomfortable with my students trying to create what I thought was distance. Because in order to teach what I teach, in order to research the way I research, I need you to know that I'm a human being with failings. And that I get it wrong a lot of the time. And that often the getting it wrong is the moment where you fully understand the importance of your research. It's not humanizing the other. It's recognizing that you've become human. Okay, I'm going to shut up. I want to laugh
now. I hope you now see why Joy is one of my favorite humans ever. Thank you so much, Joy. Yes, thank you. We have a few minutes for a couple of questions. Shall we? Yes?
Professor Joy, thank you so much, or Dr. Joy, Dr. Mama Joy.
Joy.
Mama Joy.
Thank you so much for your comments. I guess 2 things stood out for me. I study the rise of right-wing populism in about 10 democracies, and I think what the sort of well-meaning left has done is that we've completely externalized populism, and we try to look at right-wing populism especially as a completely other or externalized force. And there's no other place in sort of democratic politics that pathologizes a particular political view except when we look at the right wing. And then the second thing, I guess, is I think part of the, in my impression, failure of Western-style democracy has been that it's completely externalized illiberal forces. So we see like Trevor Noah, for example, dressing up Trump in a similar costume to Idi Amin. So I think that there's a lot to be said about this externalization of things that we don't necessarily understand. My question is, are there any texts that you can suggest for someone who's engaging in fieldwork in that stream? I'm obviously liberal, but would like to understand sort of what this new and rising political view is, but I don't want to externalize it because I think it's as much a part of what's happening to democracy as it is undemocratic. So any texts you can suggest and any strategies for making sure that the fieldwork is both objective but also an internalization of what's happening in the field.
Okay. Give me your email address, because I think that would probably be better. Don't put me on the spot when it comes to readings, because there's, right? But I do think, in terms of your second question, one of the most important aspects that American anthropology brought into the discipline was the idea around reflexivity. And reflexivity to me is not reflection. Okay? You have reflection, and when you decide to do a mental shift, which then translates into a physical shift in terms of how you do your field work, you have become reflexive. Does that make sense? So for me, it's imperative that you remember and pay attention to who you are. Not as necessarily a political being, but as a social being. What is your baggage? Because that baggage lends to a particular kind of lens that you will use when you look at the other. Okay. So even before you try to understand the other, you need to know a bit about you. And Dixon would probably say, because we are not a finite being, we are always becoming, you only ever know yourself in terms of time and place and context. Right? So who you are tomorrow is going to be very different to who you are today, because you probably would have had time to think about what I've said, and you will either go, lot of BS, and I'll ignore everything, or you'll go, there are moments or pieces that I can take, and it will work in the subconscious. Yeah?
There's one at the back. Oh, yeah, yes, and then one here. And make them quick and short, because we're about to wrap up for the next one.
Okay. Hi, my name's Dare. I'm an intern at the advocacy team, which works in global health. But I'm interested in terms of conformity and group polarization, the idea that people tend to kind of discuss certain issues with people who are very much like them, and that heightens their view. So if you're against something at level 6, by the time you finish discussing it with your peers, you'll end up thinking it's a level 8 or level 9. And I wanted to know how you can engage with people of an opposite view to kind of get more information from a different perspective without feeling attacked, because one of the ideas of people grouping together is for safe spaces and that sort of balance. Thank you.
Okay. I think that's a very profound question, given what happened in 2015, rolling over into 2016, right? So fees must fall. I was at Rhodes at the time. And then running into the RU reference list where there were concerns around rapists on campus. Okay. I reflect back in terms of teaching moments. There's a second-year course that I teach, or used to teach at Rhodes, called Power and Wealth. And at the start, I would literally encourage everybody to understand that they are human. Yeah. So I'd start a class by saying, so how do you feel? One word. And they'd go, aren't we supposed to be thinking? And I go, yeah, we'll get to that, but tell me how you feel. Yeah. Did lots of engagements like that, lots of trust exercises, leading each other, blindfolded. And then by the third and fourth week, we start to talk about race and class in South Africa. And if you think that everybody loved each other the first 3 weeks, you get it. Spot on. Week 4, are you like really? Because what starts to happen, the diversity of experience comes to the fore. And it's often racialized, right? And in South Africa, race and class are intimately linked, as in other parts of the world. So when you talk about the one, you talk about the other. And people who were just loving each other last week and hugging each other and gazing at each other are now going, your parents, your grandparents, and the other one is saying, but I didn't know about that. I'm of a different generation, right? What do you do in that moment? You give people the space to talk. You've brought them there. Take the responsibility. You can't leave it to them. You know what you're doing, I hope. I've often felt like that. Do I know what I'm doing? Because I'm not a psychologist. And these things are going, right? And I say, okay, we need to talk about this tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, until you start to understand that what you are reading has resonance in your lived experience. So you cannot come at anyone with a diverse viewpoint if you haven't made the effort to get to know who you are talking to. Yeah? So I'm going to end with this. A friend of mine and I, we get very irritated with each other because politically we are on opposite poles. And she gets really to that point where she goes, let's just agree to disagree because you're in this humanizing thing. No. No. Right? I can tell you if I didn't love her, I would probably have blocked her on WhatsApp already, unfriended her on Facebook, just never to communicate with her again, right? But I understand who she is. And I have to give her that space as she does the same for me. So sometimes I think we try to rush conversations. Timing is important. The grandmothers would say that.
The grandmothers and the very wise Joy would say timing is important. And please join me in giving a very warm round of applause to Joy.